So I think the way we try to structure this first white paper is to give an overview of what the construction problems are, the construction sector problems are, the classic problems of fragmentation, segregation of the industry. Then explain very briefly blockchain and BIM, and then jump into cash flow and what we are calling computational procurement or smart contracts. So I guess it's more us asking questions to the audience and trying to complete that information. And also, of course, it's a debate. Also, we would like to hear more from you. So I'll then ask you to start, because you have some questions.
Oh, I have many questions, but I'm a lawyer, so I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't. I think, particularly from my part around cash flow, obviously I'm an England and Wales qualified lawyer, so I'm only competent to discuss that area of law. The paper does touch on, look from the US, sorry, I'm looking at Britain now, from the US, and there is a slightly different environment. So when we begin to talk or think about solutions, there's a lot of complex requirements. Different jurisdictions will require different legal frameworks within which payment might happen. And we're quite fortunate in the UK to have something as reasonably, I suppose, prescriptive as the Construction Act. There is some ambiguity, and lawyers will always try and find those ambiguities and leverage them. But I think all the standard form contracts, I think Richard from the JCTs here, there he is, deal at length, one would say, with payment mechanisms. I don't know, maybe we just put Richard on the spot and ask him about payment mechanisms and blockchain, and what your view around the difficulties of payment in the construction industry are, perhaps more generally.
I mean, there are various layers to this. Yes, there are many layers to this business of payment, because there's due process, and then there's bad behaviour. And the bad behaviour part of it is all to do with trust, and also to do with the lack of a solution to working capital. Main contractors live on the money they have not paid out to others. Yeah. And that's a pernicious position, and it is widely exploited. So things like that 50% retention are all part of the trickiness that I can live on your money if you let me. But the flow of money otherwise ought to be entirely transparent, entirely set up and obvious if everything goes to plan. And the more quality that we have in the delivery of the product, the less reason there will be to have hold-ups in payments. The trouble is we don't have a high quality control in what we build when we build on site. And it's partly due to coordination failures, and partly it's due to workmanship, and things slow down. So I think there are a number of ways in which digital practice improves things. Forgetting blockchain for a moment, things like off-site manufacture radically improve timescales and quality delivered, and therefore payment would flow with far less of an issue. So I think we have to look at all those potential improvements alongside what we might achieve through a blockchain-based payment system. But the fundamental thing is this business of trust. Are you hanging on to my money because you need it, or because I don't deserve it? And the disputatiousness is obviously very close to the surface, and the lawyers make their living out of that. And if there wasn't dispute, what would all the lawyers do?
I may have just done myself out of a job, is that? That's the take-home. Perfect. But if everything worked properly, yes, there would be no need for lawyers, and it's interesting when that you mentioned that. That's true. I think particularly on the dispute side, because it's
the front end lawyers.
Because it is so expensive, because it is so confrontational, adversarial in nature by design. But yeah, if you can begin to reduce that acrimony, and just in terms of projects, I think if I remember most recently, it was probably the Terminal 5 project at Heathrow. They pre-agreed let's say a legal, financial and insurance framework within which everybody would work. And that gave, I was working at Arup at the time, and that gave a lot of comfort to all the parties involved. Suddenly, all the liability and risk and concern was already managed within the project, so in a sense everybody can relax, and it became a problem-solving environment as opposed to a, well, you said you didn't do, point finger, let's adjudicate on that. So I think there are environmental things, and you mentioned offsite manufacturing.
Absolutely. I mean,
I think
T5,
pre-preparation as well.
T5 was in the UK, very rare situation where the client decides to retain the risk in order to maximise collaboration within the team. And that's more common in the USA as integrated project delivery, but in the UK it hardly ever happens. It's planned to happen a lot more. Project 13 is essentially the same thing. And obviously that takes away a very great deal of the tension and streamlines all the processes. But I did have a conversation with Grosvenor Estates quite recently, in which they admitted that they spend more on lawyers than they do on designers. And the question of where the value is added in those two comparative fees, it is a bit striking.
I tend to think it's very. I tend to think, particularly disputes lawyers. My view as a disputes lawyer is, I'm there to minimise loss. It's quite a negative thing to do, but I'm there to try and get my client out of jail, as it were, minimise that loss. Sorry, Rick, you mentioned something.
Yeah, I mean, we've been touching on a number of really great things, and I just so happened to work as a project management consultant with Mace. And out of the U.S., I have the opportunity, not as much as I would like, but to be part of the upfront stages when the project is really just starting to get thought about. And when we have the opportunity to think about construction contracting, yeah, I think it makes a whole lot of sense to either think design build, integrated contract models, and maybe that's the evolution of the next paper. We haven't touched on that quite a lot. We've really talked a lot in the paper about cash flow as it exists today. And I would say, looking at the project, I think my areas that I focused on in the paper are more around tracking data more in a systematic way, and looking at, like, say, the likes of PAS 1192 and now ISO 19650 as example structures for your information management globally, not just here in the UK or in Europe, but really setting up a plan, or not just information management plan, but project execution plan, setting up frameworks that make sense to roll out the business or roll out the project. So for me, I think a lot of the cash flow issues stem out of not setting up the project right. And if you have the opportunity, set it up right. But there are things that we can do now with the process that we're managing cash with right now. And for me, because there's going to be a transition to mindset around how you set up the project, just like how there's a transition to setting up any blockchain, right? we're all on this innovation cusp. I think that if we can start addressing these issues where they are, then we'll get people to have a little bit more trust in the technology or trust in some of the processes that we're setting up on those more incremental levels. So sort of like your micro white papering approach.
Okay, yeah. David?
Thanks. I'll try and, I don't know whether you can hear the microphone, but I'll just shout. I think there are two questions that are hanging over, certainly in my head, is can blockchain facilitate the cash flow process, and will it facilitate the cash flow process? I strongly believe it can. Whether it will comes back to some of the things that have been discussed in terms of the initial procurement setup, how deals are done in the first place, and various things have been mentioned. IPD, which I don't know a great deal about, I know what it is in theory. Does it really happen in the States? Probably there's a spectrum, I'd imagine, of lip service and an actual observation. The second one is initiatives that are happening in the UK, apologies, it's UK-centric, which are single project insurance, and almost Brittany said something that it's about comparing the project success with corporate success, and they are totally isolated at the moment. So if you can get a project framework where the project success is aligned with the corporate success, and people don't have to worry about being sued by each other because there's single project insurance, and people have single project information sets and so forth, I think that has to be in place before you can answer the second question, which is whether blockchain will help cash flow. So these things, and when these things will happen, who knows? But we shouldn't stop trying to get the possibility that blockchain can do it by saying, well, we can't do it whilst we've got the existing, culture, setup, economic basis, procurement models of the industry. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I was wondering if you see something similar to what we call social credit, but more like a corporation social credit, like networks of corporations having that social visibility in the blockchain and thinking about a much longer life cycle and how they behave and what they deliver, and the whole problem of seeing projects failure or success as how they operate and having consequences and impact on how they operate. I think this is something that blockchain could add contrast and visibility.
To add to all the points that was mentioned, there's also, again, things about the business models itself. Again, sorry for concentrating on the UK. There is massive research about how tier ones especially, and the cash flow problems related to that, is set up to retain cash, and that's their business model. Now, we talk about lower business profit margins, but then they've got a higher return on capital employed because they don't employ a lot of capital themselves. And that's their business model. So talking about cash flow is a fundamental about business models that I believe should also be discussed. And blockchain can be a disruptor to that. Now, taking David's point, would then tier ones lead, or you set up a solution which might potentially work and have amazing consequences, positive consequences, but that would basically mean they have to rework on their entire business model. It's similar to, are you putting lawyers out of a job? Are you putting tier ones out of a job?
Maybe they should be out of a job.
Exactly, and you see things like businesses like X7, Carillion and now here and all having all massive financial crises because of that.
Well, yeah, you see that. Carillion, I think, was more to do with an overextension of the finances, let's say. But I touched on the 2008 credit crisis, and there was, I'm sure we all know the phrase, too big to fail. If something's too big to fail, then it's too big. No? Is that not the logical progression of that statement? And if it is too big to fail, then fundamentally there's a problem with the business model. The business model is wrong. You're approaching business in the wrong way. And maybe what blockchain will do is equalise power. I think we touched on this yesterday as well. It was equalising power between the supply chain, because each part of that supply chain is fundamentally critical to the success of that project. And it's, I don't know, I begin to sound like some sort of libertarian. It's about the little guy getting paid. But there was a great little video, I think it was on LinkedIn. The subcontractor hadn't been paid. Now, this was a small 10-person firm. And what that meant was that he couldn't pay his workers, they couldn't pay their mortgages, and their families couldn't eat. That's how close and personal that non-payment was to him. Now, to a big entity, it's all part of cash flow, accountants manage it, it's all fine. To him, it's virtually life or death. And so he took his little digger and he drove through the hotel that hadn't paid him in frustration. You've probably seen the video. Now, I don't condone that action, but I understand the sentiment and the anger and the frustration. You take away, because what I see as a lawyer around payment is the game plan. I'm not going to pay you. I'm going to give you an inadequate reason as to why I'm not paying you, and I'm going to try and hold on to that cash. So I'm going to create a mini credit tightening, credit shorting within a project. It's not acceptable. It's not how contracts, not how economics work, and it's certainly not the intent of the Construction Act, if I can be as bold. Construction Act is all about freeing up cash flow. People just find other ways to play games around it, bigger retentions, holding on money, spending money that isn't yours, and so on. So if blockchain can take that control away, but you also alleviate concerns around the supply chain, I think that's what will show you more successful projects. And if you're playing those sorts of games to try and be the biggest and the baddest in the market, then maybe you shouldn't be in the market playing the game. I don't know.
Then again, it goes back to power, isn't it? Power, risk, and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Tim.
Yeah. Just to pick on your last point, you said more successful projects. I think the question I'd ask for that is more successful for who? Because I don't believe that in any of things there's really ever a win-win. Right? The system is set up because it works at the moment for some people better than others, and it generally works for the people who hold the money because they can dictate. So thinking very generally, any fundamental or disruptive change to a status quo is very likely to be frowned on and slowed down by the people who are doing best out of the status quo. I'm sorry, this goes back a little bit to what I was saying yesterday about, at the moment with BIM, certainly the full supply chain is not engaged. And it'll be perhaps the customer, maybe not. Certainly the tier one, if at all the tier one and the tier two maximum.
Well, the only thing I would add to that is a successful project goes as planned, right? It goes back to our earlier point, which is, so for those who may not know very much about me, I'm very much deeply ingrained in the lean construction community and talk with people regularly who are rolling out successful IPD projects, decentralizing the risk, decentralizing the way that the benefits are distributed and how the payment is transparent. The payment is laid out, it's transparent to everyone. How much everyone's going to get paid, how they're going to get paid, which is completely atypical to the current process. But I think there is a win-win, and maybe I'm pie in the sky here with IPD, but I think that the people who work on those projects, they're happy. I don't know how many of us are happy in this industry, but they're happy. They're like, hey, I want to go on the project again with these people. I think if you can plan it well with all those pieces in place, whether it be insurance, whether it's having your escrow set up, planning for financing, all of those pieces, and roll it out as planned, you're going to have that win-win. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I was just going to mark English a second, but I think Winston has something to say about that, especially when you bring this, South American politics scenario, because it's not easy there. Not because people are naive, but because of actually quite the opposite, the incredibly elaborate corruption the strategies and so on, and also the very steep learning curve for BIM adoption. So I think you have you could tell us one thing or two.
What about the experience in Latin America?
In construction,
Well, well, they take the case of Brazil, for example.
yes.
You have lead construction companies like Odebrecht, Andrade Gutierrez. Many of these firms are family-owned firms, and they operate throughout the region. Particularly, we take the iconic case of Odebrecht, which is operating throughout Latin America, but it was operating in a very untransparent way. In a very corrupt way, affecting, up to the level of presidency in a country like Peru, for example, and in Brazil itself. This led to President Lula in Brazil following a trial that was a whole process, a legal process started by a judge in Curitiba called Judge Moro, who began to bring out all the issues that have been affecting Odebrecht. Odebrecht's managing director ended up in prison on a 19-year jail sentence. The way that they actually worked the process, Judge Moore worked the process, was very clever, because he got all the lead executives in Odebrecht to do a deal in which they will reveal what they did, who they paid off, and then they'd actually follow through that in all the countries in the region. So it had a knock-on effect. And this meant that the executives who did what was called a delación premiada, they were able to basically retire from the operations of the company. And the company was downsized from 180,000 employees to 80,000 employees approximately. And it reduced its presence in Brazil and throughout the region. And of course there were follow-up investigations taking place in Peru. In Peru, 5 presidents, all the recent presidents since 1984 approximately, have been implicated in acts of corruption. Some have fled the country. One past president quite recently committed suicide. Then we have the case of Fujimori as well. You've probably heard of Mala, all of them. And so it's had a big disastrous effect on the political system. But there is a possibility of change, turning this around in the region, and certainly in Brazil, that is the intention now. I just give you a little bit of a snapshot of what is happening. You can follow up by just reading, doing a little bit of research. But that's just one example. So it's very important that something be done.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and Mark, you had a question.
Yeah. When you strip building back to its bare bones, there's 3 items that affect the supply chain significantly. 2 are objective, 1 are subjective. The 2 objective ones are labour and materials. Calculate those very quickly. The subjective one is quality, and that's a problem, or can be a problem. I've had a bid manager from a large contractor in Dublin tell me that what they do is they build their own model. They'll take the information, whatever way it comes from the design team, but they'll build their own model. And they'll invest whatever, 30, 50 grand into doing that. That's a drop in the ocean to them in terms of perhaps the benefit that they'll derive from that. But by doing that, they can get to 95%. That's an extraordinary figure in terms of we can build this in around contingencies, build this, build that. 95% is a pretty good figure. Where they come a cropper is not on all that extra work that they've done, is on the procurement system that they now have to subject themselves to within that. This is where our problem is. It's in the procurement system. And perhaps if you've got a rotten procurement system, blockchain is going to do you any good whatsoever within that. But if you had a procurement system in which there was a level playing field so that everybody is using the same information and not subjected to lowest bid, but you're set to best quality. Now the application of blockchain in that scenario becomes a very interesting